think there's probably a sense ever since Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron, since they had their bilateral meeting where they seemed to break the deadlock around how exactly some EU funds to deal with COVID-19 were going to work. There's probably been a sense that that's been a fait accompli. Generally, the idea was that instead of the EU having so-called corona bonds, that basically members would have to increase their contributions to the EU budget, but then the EU centrally would be able to borrow and then issue that money as grants to make sure that countries were able to get what they needed. Is that something of a fait accompli now, or are there still some resistance to that will have to be ironed out this weekend?
Well, there's lots of things to be ironed out. But just to begin with the Franco-German announcement, I think that was pivotal, although the Chancellor was asked about that in the Parliament this week, and more or less saying, why should the two countries be the only ones to have, got together on this? And her answer was, well, if Germany and France can't agree on it, what hope for the rest? So I think she was quite wise on that. There's two issues here. One is a realisation that in the beginning of this pandemic, Europe really didn't look after each other, that Italy and Spain to some extent felt left behind. There was a calculation then done about the economic plus the social consequences of the pandemic, and it is enormous, and we're seeing that in Ireland as well. And a belief that there was a really big package was needed to kickstart the economies and to, if you like, invest in projects that are future oriented, like digitalisation and the green economy. But equally, there's this discussion about the next budget. Now, I'm in Parliament a while, and every single debate about a budget, the MFF, has been fraught.
I mean, they're giant. They're 7-year projects. They take ages to get over the line.
And they're over 1 trillion. And, every member state, wants something out of it and wants to get something that they perhaps haven't got in the past. I remember my first engagement was Tony Blair as Prime Minister. So now we're in a different scenario. I think it would be difficult even if we hadn't had the pandemic, this budget discussion. But now we have two big pots of money on the table and a lot of disagreement still. So if you look at the big package you've mentioned, the 750 billion, most of this is, if you like, to go by way of grants rather than loans to the hardest hit member states. And
is that more along the lines of what you would consider to be disaster aid rather than it being some sort of investment for future development, that kind of thing?
Well, I think, no, it would have to be invested in projects with some return, because I think the whole idea of this is not to just go back to where we were, but to rise us beyond it. The big question about grants is that some member states, like the Dutch, don't believe in grants. They believe, yes, low interest loans are acceptable, but they're not too happy with grants. There's also a debate on the, if you like, the key that will be used to allocate the funds, and there are some disagreements between member states on that. There are then a discussion around how is this money repaid? So it's borrowed by the Commission, it has to be repaid. And again, there are some who would say this needs rather to be repaid earlier rather than stretched over 7 or longer years, and that we need to find own resources to finance the repayment of these big loans.